She sat on my lap, and stayed there. What started as an awkward moment turned into something I didn't expect. The evening had settled like a soft blanket over the city, painting the room in warm amber light. I was at my girlfriend's apartment, a place that always smelled faintly of vanilla and the faint sweetness of freshly washed linen. The windows were open just a crack, letting in the gentle hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. Soft jazz played from a corner speaker, low enough that the music felt like another layer of the room rather than a distraction. I had just made myself comfortable on the living room couch, stretching my legs and letting the quiet of the apartment sink in. There was something inherently soothing about being here, away from the rush of my own apartment and the constant background noise of my daily life. She had been talking about her day, her voice calm and familiar, and I had listened, nodding, commenting here and there, the ease of our companionship filling the space. And then, unexpectedly, her sister arrived. I'd met her a few times before, always confident, always poised, but tonight she moved differently, with a kind of quiet grace that made her presence feel larger than the room. She smiled when I greeted her, a little hesitant, a little curious, like she wasn't quite sure how long she should stay or how much of herself to reveal. I noticed the subtle things about her immediately. The way her hair caught the lamplight, the faint scent of something floral and comforting, and the ease with which she carried herself. It wasn't flashy or demanding attention, but there was an undeniable warmth there, a quiet confidence, the kind that made people lean in without realizing it. She greeted my girlfriend with a gentle hug and then looked toward me, eyes soft but attentive. We exchanged a polite handshake first, fingers lingering a little longer than strictly necessary, and then she chose a spot on the couch near me. There was a quiet, almost imperceptible energy in the room, something unspoken that made the air feel a little heavier, a little more intimate, without any words being said. I could feel my own awareness sharpening, how she shifted, how her weight settled, how even the smallest gestures seemed deliberate. I tried to ground myself in normalcy, focusing on conversation. We talked about trivial things at first, the weather, a recent movie, a book one of us had read, but even in these light topics, there was an undercurrent of something else. Something unspoken. Something that made my chest feel warmer, my attention sharper. And then she laughed at a joke my girlfriend had made, leaning back slightly in her chair. The movement was casual, almost careless, but the warmth lingered in a way I didn't expect. I realized I was noticing every detail, the way her sleeve brushed her arm as she reached for her drink, the small tilt of her head as she looked at me, the soft tone in her voice. Every subtle motion made the room feel smaller, cozier, more alive. By the time my girlfriend excused herself to shower, the atmosphere had already shifted, though I couldn't quite place how. Something about that quiet evening, the gentle music, the soft glow of the lamp, and her presence made it feel like the ordinary had edged toward the extraordinary. And I had no idea how much that small, unassuming night would change the rhythm of everything to come. My girlfriend had just excused herself to take a shower, leaving the apartment in a quiet, almost hushed state. The soft jazz continued to play, and the warm glow of the lamp made the room feel smaller, cozier. I assumed the evening would continue as normal, just me and a polite conversation with her sister. But then, in a moment so subtle I almost didn't notice, she shifted closer and sat down on my lap. At first I froze, my mind struggling to process the sudden closeness. Her weight was light, almost delicate, but undeniable. The warmth radiating from her legs pressed gently against mine, and I felt an unexpected jolt of awareness ripple through my chest. It was the kind of moment that made time stretch, the seconds hanging between us heavier than any conversation could ever be. Her movements were natural, unhurried. She didn't glance at me immediately, instead settling in as if it were perfectly ordinary. And yet, the ordinary was anything but. I could feel the soft fabric of her sweater against my arm, the gentle brush of her hair as it fell near my shoulder. The subtle scent of her perfume mingled with the lingering aroma of vanilla in the apartment, and suddenly the space felt charged, not in a dramatic way, but quietly, intimately, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of us. I shifted slightly, trying to find the balance between politeness and my own hesitation. I wanted to make her comfortable without overstepping, but every adjustment only made me more acutely aware of her presence. Her hands rested lightly on my thighs, and I noticed how her posture seemed relaxed, almost trusting, which made the situation feel even more complicated. Are you comfortable?" I asked softly, my voice lower than usual. She glanced up, a small, almost apologetic smile on her face. "Yeah, I guess I am," she said, her tone casual but with a hint of vulnerability. The way her eyes met mine, brief, flickering, and then away, made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. It was a subtle, quiet tension, the kind that lingers long after the moment passes. I caught myself observing every small detail, the curve of her shoulders as she relaxed, the slight shift of her weight, the warmth radiating from her side, the tiny pauses in her breathing that somehow felt synchronized with mine. Each gesture, each slight movement, carried meaning beyond the words she spoke, or didn't speak. We remained that way, sitting close, the apartment holding its gentle, almost sacred silence. I felt a mix of emotions, curiosity, hesitation, a touch of embarrassment, but also a surprising comfort. There was no rush, no expectation, only the quiet awareness of each other's presence. Every second stretched just long enough to make me wonder how much of this closeness was accidental, and how much was quietly understood between us. By the time my girlfriend's footsteps approached from the bathroom, signaling her imminent return, I realized the moment was already imprinted on me. The sudden, unexpected closeness wasn't just physical, it was a doorway to a deeper understanding, a subtle shift in the dynamic of the evening. And as she finally stood, brushing slightly against me as she adjusted, I couldn't help but wonder how much of that quiet tension would linger, long after the awkwardness had passed. After the initial shock of her sitting on my lap faded, something shifted in the room. The awkwardness softened into a quiet, almost tangible understanding. Neither of us spoke at first. The only sounds were the faint hum of the city outside, the low jazz weaving through the apartment, and the subtle rhythm of our breathing. It was an odd combination, comfort mixed with heightened awareness, that made each small movement feel significant. Her hands rested lightly on my thighs, not gripping or tense, just there. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, steady and gentle, and I realized that I was unconsciously mirroring her posture, leaning slightly forward so our closeness didn't feel accidental. I noticed how her hair occasionally brushed my arm, soft strands against the skin, and how the small shifts she made carried a quiet rhythm. It wasn't just physical closeness, it was an intimacy born of trust, a shared awareness that neither of us wanted to break. Finally, we started talking, softly, almost hesitantly at first. The topics were ordinary, books we had read, small quirks about daily life, but even in these mundane conversations, there was a depth that I hadn't expected. She laughed softly at a story I told, the sound light and genuine, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with physical contact. It was the realization that moments like this, unexpected, unplanned, could carry so much meaning. As we talked, I became more attuned to the subtle language of her presence. The slight tilt of her head when she was curious, the way her shoulders relaxed when she felt comfortable, the gentle brush of her hands against mine as we shifted on the couch, all of it spoke louder than any words could. Every small touch, every shared glance, created a silent conversation between us. There was no rush to define it, no pressure to label it. It was simply there, delicate and fragile, waiting to be acknowledged. At one point, our eyes met and held for a heartbeat longer than necessary. In that instant, I could sense a quiet vulnerability in her gaze, something unspoken, almost fleeting, that revealed more than words ever could. My own hesitation mirrored hers. I wanted to lean closer, to bridge the gap entirely, but I also wanted to honor the trust and restraint in the moment. It was a delicate balance between closeness and respect, and somehow, we both navigated it instinctively. The apartment felt different somehow, smaller, more intimate, like the outside world had faded into the background. I noticed the subtle scent of her perfume mixed with the faint vanilla lingering from earlier, and how her presence seemed to warm the space around me. Each second stretched just a little longer, filled with unspoken understanding. We had created a tiny bubble of connection, one that existed purely in the shared comfort and quiet attention we gave each other. By the time my girlfriend's shower ended, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. The moment hadn't been dramatic or overt, but it had deepened the emotional landscape of the evening. A silent bond had formed, one built on trust, subtle gestures, and the simple act of being present with each other. And as I felt her weight shift slightly and brush against me once more before returning to her own space, I understood that the slow burn of connection had only just begun. The conversation had settled into a quiet rhythm, one that felt almost sacred. We weren't talking loudly or gesturing dramatically, but the room itself seemed to shrink around us, giving our words, and silences, room to breathe. She leaned back slightly against me, not consciously, but in a way that made me acutely aware of her warmth. The soft brush of her sweater against my arm was comforting, almost grounding, and I realized I was holding my breath, trying not to break the fragile intimacy of the moment. Then she spoke, her voice softer than before, tinged with a hint of vulnerability that caught me off guard. She began to tell me a story, not about work, not about trivialities, but about herself. About moments in her life where she had felt uncertain, alone, or misunderstood. Her words were careful, measured, as if she were testing the waters, gauging whether I would truly listen. And I did. I leaned slightly closer, my hand brushing hers in an unintentional gesture of reassurance. The warmth of her skin against mine was subtle but enough to make my pulse quicken. As she spoke, I noticed the smallest details. The way her eyes flicked away when she mentioned a particularly painful memory, the soft exhale when she found a lighter moment to laugh at, the faint tremor in her voice that betrayed a depth of feelings she wasn't openly admitting. Every small movement, every nuanced expression, pulled me deeper into the moment. It wasn't about attraction in the overt sense. It was about seeing someone fully, vulnerably, and being entrusted with that vision. At one point, her hand shifted slightly on my leg, brushing against mine more deliberately. I didn't move away. Instead, I let my fingers brush hers lightly, just enough to convey steady presence without overstepping. There was a silent understanding in that simple touch, a reassurance that she could be herself, completely, without fear of judgment or interruption. I realized then that this closeness wasn't just physical, it was profoundly emotional. She paused, looking at me with an expression that combined uncertainty and quiet trust. "I don't usually talk about this," she admitted softly. I nodded, not needing words, just letting her know through my posture, through the calm steadiness of my presence, that it was okay. That here, in this small apartment, on this couch, with the soft glow of the lamp and the faint music in the background, she could be seen, fully and openly. The air between us was charged with a quiet intimacy, the kind that isn't loud or flashy but lingers in the chest long after the moment passes. I could feel her shoulder brush mine as she shifted slightly to get more comfortable, the warmth radiating from her side a steady comfort. Her vulnerability had invited me into a space that few people ever allowed, and it was humbling. By the time my girlfriend's footsteps echoed down the hallway, signaling the shower's end, I realized the evening had transformed. What had started as casual conversation had evolved into a deep, silent understanding, one built on trust, warmth, and shared vulnerability. And even as she adjusted her position, and we prepared to re-enter the ordinary world of the evening, I knew that the quiet bond we had forged in these moments would linger, an invisible thread connecting us long after the night ended. By now, the initial surprise of the evening had fully melted away, leaving a quiet, charged awareness between us. It wasn't the sort of tension that demanded words. It was woven into every glance, every small movement, every unspoken hesitation. She sat close to me, her warmth still lingering, and I became acutely aware of the subtle rhythm of her breathing. Each inhale and exhale seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, a quiet metronome for the silent conversation we were having without words. Her eyes met mine occasionally, fleeting glances that lingered just long enough to make my chest tighten. There was something unspoken in those looks, a curiosity, a quiet invitation to understand her more deeply, and perhaps, a vulnerability she wasn't willing to admit outright. I caught myself returning her gaze with an intensity one hadn't intended, aware of the delicate line we were walking between comfort and something more. We laughed softly at a shared joke, the sound light and genuine, but even in laughter the tension remained. I noticed how her hand brushed against mine during a shift on the couch, how her shoulder tilted slightly toward me when she leaned back. Each motion was casual, effortless, yet charged with an energy that made me hyper-aware of my own reactions. My fingers twitched slightly, brushing against her arm without conscious thought, and I felt a flicker of warmth in response. It wasn't physical desire in a crude sense. This was something subtler, deeper. It was the pull of emotional intimacy, the magnetic weight of someone who had trusted me with pieces of herself. Her age and experience, her calm confidence tempered by moments of vulnerability, made every gesture more significant, every shared silence more meaningful. There was an elegance in the way she carried herself, in the measured pauses she allowed herself, that made the ordinary feel profound. I found myself noticing small details I might otherwise have overlooked. The faint floral note of her perfume, the soft texture of her sweater against my arm, the rhythm of her hands as she gestured while speaking. Even the way her legs shifted slightly, the subtle warmth radiating through her clothing, made the room feel cozier, more intimate. Every movement drew me in further, not with urgency, but with a steady, compelling magnetism that was impossible to ignore. Time seemed to stretch. Every second was heavy with unspoken possibilities, yet nothing was forced. We were simply existing in the same space, acutely aware of one another. It was in the lingering looks, the pauses between sentences, the quiet brush of her hand across my thigh as she adjusted her position. Each moment built upon the last, weaving a tapestry of subtle desire and emotional closeness that neither of us had openly acknowledged, yet both of us felt. When my girlfriend's footsteps echoed through the hallway, signaling her return, the tension didn't vanish, it shifted. There was a fleeting look, a small smile shared between us, a silent acknowledgement that the bond we had formed during these quiet moments was real, layered, and undeniably present. And though the ordinary rhythm of the evening would resume, I knew that something fundamental had shifted, an unspoken promise that the slow burn of connection was only beginning. The sound of the bathroom door opening was gentle, yet it shifted the energy in the room immediately. My girlfriend's footsteps echoed softly against the hardwood floor, each step a reminder that the intimate pause we'd shared was about to end. Or so it seemed. I felt a small tightening in my chest, a mix of lingering tension and the realization that the quiet connection we'd cultivated might be disrupted. Her sister shifted slightly on my lap, almost imperceptibly, a light pressure moving as she prepared to slide off. I noticed the subtle hesitation in her movements, the slight tilt of her head as if she were gauging my reaction. The warmth of her presence, steady and reassuring moments ago, now felt like a fragile thread, easily broken by the normal rhythm of life. Yet there was no awkwardness, no panic, just a quiet grace in the way she navigated the space, as if she had known all along how to leave without leaving entirely. "Did I miss much?" my girlfriend asked casually, stepping back into the living room with a towel draped over her shoulder. Her voice was light, teasing even, but there was no malice, just the everyday rhythm of comfort between us. We exchanged a small smile, and in that instant, I realized how ordinary and extraordinary these moments could coexist. The sister lifted herself gently, brushing slightly against my arm as she moved. That simple touch was enough. A lingering warmth, a quiet acknowledgement of the closeness we had shared. Her hand paused briefly on my shoulder, a soft pat, just enough to convey thanks and trust, and then she stepped aside, giving my girlfriend her space. I felt a mixture of relief and lingering attachment, the tension of the past hour settling into something softer, gentler. As she moved to sit in a chair across from us, the room's energy shifted subtly. The intimacy hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed shape, like a current flowing beneath a calm surface. My eyes met hers across the room, and in that brief glance, there was an unspoken understanding, an acknowledgement that what had happened, however fleeting or delicate, was meaningful. It was a bond forged in quiet moments, in shared laughter, in trust and vulnerability, and it didn't need words to exist. The apartment felt warmer somehow, not just from the lingering scent of her perfume or the soft glow of the lamp, but from the emotional resonance of what had transpired. I leaned back on the couch, my hands resting lightly on my knees, and felt a subtle shift in myself. There was relief, certainly, but also a sense of awe at how a single unexpected moment, sitting quietly together, sharing vulnerability, could leave such a lasting imprint. We all settled into the living room, conversation flowing lightly and naturally, jokes shared without pressure, laughter soft and easy. The sister's presence was still comforting, her warmth now more contained, but the subtle thread of connection remained, woven invisibly into the atmosphere. And I realized, as I listened to them both talk, that the slow burn of intimacy didn't require overt gestures or words. It thrived in small, meaningful touches, in lingering glances, in shared silence, and in the trust that grew quietly between hearts. By the end of the evening, I knew one thing clearly: the moment had changed something inside me. The subtle tension, the quiet vulnerability, the warmth and closeness, it had all become a part of the story we were writing together, slowly, deliberately, with care. And that, more than anything, felt profoundly real. The apartment had settled into a calm rhythm, the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle shadows across the room. The jazz from earlier had quieted to the faint hum of background noise, leaving space for comfortable conversation and the quiet heartbeat of shared presence. My girlfriend had resumed her place on the couch, wrapped in a towel and the familiar ease of home, while her sister had taken a chair nearby, close enough that the warmth and subtle energy of our earlier closeness lingered in the air. It was extraordinary how ordinary it all felt. The tension, the fleeting moments of intimacy, had softened into a subtle, invisible thread connecting us. There were no dramatic confessions, no overt gestures, just the quiet acknowledgement that the night had changed something between us. The sister laughed softly at a light joke, the sound blending with the hum of the city outside. I noticed the way her eyes briefly met mine, the faint smile that lingered longer than casual politeness required. There was an unspoken understanding there, a recognition of the bond that had formed in those earlier moments, without needing to define it. I shifted slightly on the couch, allowing the warmth of both women's presence to feel natural rather than intrusive. The subtle brush of the sister's hand against mine as she adjusted in her chair was fleeting, gentle, and yet it carried the weight of trust and shared experience. I didn't flinch. Instead, I let the moment exist as it was, soft, tender, and entirely human. It wasn't about desire or urgency. It was about the quiet affirmation that we were all present, emotionally connected, and safe in each other's company. The evening unfolded with easy conversation. My girlfriend told a story about her day at work, her voice bright and animated, while her sister chimed in with gentle observations. I listened, occasionally interjecting, but mostly I observed, the way their laughter intertwined, the subtle gestures of camaraderie, the warmth that radiated from shared familiarity. Even in small, ordinary actions, there was meaning. The way the sister brushed her hair behind her ear, how my girlfriend's hand lightly rested on her knee as she laughed, how I felt the subtle pulse of life in the room. At one point, I leaned back and let my gaze wander, taking in the quiet intimacy of the moment. There was something profoundly grounding about being here, in this space, with these people who had become more than acquaintances, more than family connections. They were part of a shared emotional landscape that I was only beginning to understand. The earlier tension had transformed into a gentle warmth, a slow-burning thread that would linger in my thoughts long after the night ended. As the evening drew to a close, I felt a soft, satisfying resolution settle over me. We had navigated unexpected closeness, shared vulnerability, and quiet tension, and yet the bond remained intact, respectful and tender. The room felt alive, not in dramatic flair, but in the subtle, human moments of trust, laughter, and warmth. I realized that slow-burn connections like these didn't need fireworks. They needed patience, attentiveness, and the willingness to simply be present with one another. In that quiet apartment, under the soft glow of the lamp and the fading hum of jazz, I understood something essential. Love and connection often bloom in silence, in small gestures, and in moments that feel fleeting yet linger indefinitely in the heart. And as we sat together, smiling softly, I knew that the evening had written a story of intimacy and trust that would remain with all of us, a delicate, enduring warmth that needed no grand declaration, just presence, understanding, and the quiet comfort of hearts attuned to each other.